Zookeepers of Reddit. What's the low-down, dirty, inside scoop on zoos? Story 1. I worked with large tortoises. We had these 5-gallon buckets for cleaning the poop out of enclosures and other buckets for feeding them the fresh grass we cut. The first day on the job, I took both buckets into the pen and started dumping out the grass. Then I went around to collect poop. I heard this awful loud grunting and something breaking. One of the 300-pound males tried to bang the bucket in front of visitors and flattened it. He would even follow me just in case I might leave more innocent buckets unattended. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. I worked at a veterinarian office years ago that had a pet African grey in the lobby. We would have to keep the chairs a good distance away from the cage because he would do this all the time to clients. Some would want to interact with him and go up to the cage. They'd baby talk to him and he'd cutely climb toward them on the bars. As soon as he lulled them into a false sense of security, they were doomed, especially the kids. He would also bark like a dog when there was a high population of cats and vice versa. He loved to rile the room up, or he'd say, "nice kitty" or "doggy." He was known to ring like the telephone and mimic us answering it. His sound and word vocabulary was huge. One night, I was at the clinic alone finishing up paperwork. I was hunkered over the counter concentrating when I hear a deep, male voice behind me say, "Hello." I froze. I knew I should have been alone, and no one had come in or I would have heard the alarm chime. Did someone hide in the clinic until closing? Then I hear it again, almost in a question. I slowly turn and realize it's coming from the cage. The parrot almost stopped my heart that night. Story 3. Used to work at a zoo. Cold weather makes the animals more active, so go on a chilly day or the first thing in the morning to see the best show. Also, those free-roaming peacocks are really stupid and sometimes go into the lions exhibit and get torn up. Story 4. You reminded me of a magical memory I treasure. I also worked at a zoo when I was like 16 and I was the only employee working in a little cabin serving food in front of the sea lions. One particular summer, they scheduled me to work there on my own every single day because I was dependable. The sea lions performed a show at 1 o'clock. On sunny days, I was too busy providing food for the humans during the show to see. When it rained, I was blessed. The zookeeper that was in charge of the show had to show up anyway to feed the sea lions, and one zookeeper had asked me, "Don't you get lonely there?" when I just started working there. I said, "Kind of." Ever since when it rained, with no people there, she would go and perform the whole show specifically for me. I clapped and cheered and she bowed at the end. On those days, it was me, maybe one parent and a kid that ran by and stood by the cabin to shelter from the rain. They would buy ice cream and say that I had a nice job. I never got to know the name of the zookeeper, but I'm grateful to her. Unrelated, I've also witnessed a group of baboons tearing a pigeon to shreds. Monkeys are savage creatures. I have never seen one of these, live sea animal shows, sea lions in particular. If the animals are treated well, I don't know, I think they're super cool. They seem to like doing what they're doing. I think sea lions are one of those animals who do things on their own for fun. So, to some extent, they must find it a little fun, especially since they know they get food at the end. Seems like a cool thing. If any of you have seen one, let me know how it was. Story 5. Everybody is overeducated and wildly underpaid. Typically, most single people can last about 2 to 3 years before they have to move on. The ones with longevity have spouses who bring home the bread and let them chase their dreams. Winters suck. Part-time hours and being outside in the cold. The dolphin trainers are stuck up. They're like the jocks in high school. They usually try to stay in shape because wetsuits aren't flattering. They perform daily and people love them, so they have an ego. You dread when a coworker gets pregnant because you'll have to pick up extra tasks. Story 6. This is more true than people realize. Used to be a keeper, met my wife there. We both loved it, but I had a master's, so I left to earn us a real living. You have to have a 4-year degree and start out part-time for a year at minimum wage. $7.25 an hour. Then after a year, you might get a full-time if there was an opening and get bumped to $9.50 an hour. They have restructured and pay better now with still crap benefits, but after 10 years, my wife is up to $15 an hour and one of the highest paid in her department. I've been at my new company for a little over a year and able to make a good living. We are constantly helping our zoo friends out with small things because we're in a position to help, where that small thing could wreck their finances for a month or more. It's a labor of love that is very physically demanding, underpaid, and undervalued. That is absolutely criminal. You need to have a 4-year degree and they start you at minimum wage? Are there big people up at the top just trying to keep everyone else in the zoo hierarchy down? I don't know, that sounds insane to me. Also, where does this guy live where minimum wage is $7.25 an hour? That is brutal. Story 7. I worked at a zoo in their museum function, not with the animals, and there was no glass in the big cat's enclosure. There was a giant moat which the tigers were always playing in and a 20-ish foot straight vertical concrete concrete wall. You could tell when they were in play mode. They'd pace back and forth along the edge of the moat and suddenly jump in surprise and roll around on their backs. For the casual visitor, they seemed like an oversized house cat. While they absolutely had small cat-like behaviors, I could never forget for a second what they could do. There was one particularly traumatic event with the lions on a very warm and very packed day. The zoo was inside a large park, so various animals wandered through the zoo all day. One unfortunate day, a large deer fell into the lion enclosure. The lion stalked it and ran it down within about 30 seconds and tore the deer to shreds in front of dozens of horrified adults and screaming kids. I felt kind of bad so many people saw, but circle of life. I just know there was one kid in there that maybe OP didn't notice, but that one kid was like, yeah, this is amazing. This is the best thing I've ever seen. At least one kid was absolutely loving it. Story 8. Went on a behind-the-scenes tour of the zoo. Saw quite a few bunnies come out during the tour. The neighboring park had a problem with people abandoning pet rabbits. It was pretty clear the dumb bunnies were getting into predator enclosures. Tour guide confirmed they were regularly getting eaten. Tour guide also indicated that other urban wildlife, raccoons, possums, squirrels, birds, were regularly eaten by predators. Said that when they drained the lion enclosure moat for maintenance, it was filled with the bones of small mammals. The most amusing stories were about the orangutans, which are wicked smart. Zookeeper trained them to give over items in exchange for food in case they needed to get something from them in the enclosure. But orangutans are smart and realized if they break things up and hand it back in lots of little pieces, they get more food. They disassembled a radio that accidentally got left in the enclosure, and when there was an opossum in the enclosure, the results were a bit more gruesome. Story 9. If you work with the animals, there's a good chance you'll not be able to have any kind of social life between the long hours/weekends and the stench. I've been kicked out of stores after work because I apparently stink way worse than I thought I did, even after scrubbing off. And I'm around animals all day, but I still can't stand when otters/sea lion keepers are around me in all-hands meetings. The rotten fish plus ferrety otter smell combo is a gagger. Meanwhile, I work with apes, and they say that I smelled like I haven't showered in a decade. Again, even after I shower. Story 10. Oh man, I remember my first day working with foxes. My coworker was giving a tour of the facility to a family where they got to play with the foxes, and she made a big deal to them about, make sure you don't touch anything wet in here. It might be fox pee, and it will absolutely not come out of anything, including your skin. And even gave them gloves to wear. Then they left and she told me to start cleaning. I said, wait, don't we have to protect ourselves from fox pee like you said? She sort of laughed and said, you work here now, get used to your new smell. Sure enough, I inevitably got some fox pee on my hand. I washed it several times. I smelled it before bed that night, and sure enough, it smelled exactly like fox pee. Very strongly. Washing not only didn't remove it, it didn't even seem to diminish it a little bit. By now, I've stopped noticing, but no one else has. This is the one thing I've never understood about people who own foxes as pets. Wouldn't they just smell awful all of the time? I get it. Foxes are really cute. They are. They're cats running on dog hardware. But come on. The smell can't be worth it. And that being said, I'm a big fan of foxes, but I would never own one or honestly even get that close to one because, first of all, they're dangerous, and second of all, yeah, I've heard they smell terrible. Story 11. Not a zookeeper, but worked in a zoo's warehouse for a couple of years. Next time you go, ask someone which animals are kill on sight in an escape. The answers will surprise you. Lions and tigers are typically on the trank and recapture list, but a jaguar the size of a golden retriever is kill on sight. The zoo I was with, the 2 jags were the only animals on site that were on the shoot to kill list. Even the silverback was on the trank first list. To answer why, jaguars will kill for sport, and if they escape, they will claim an area as their own, then hunt and kill anyone in that area that they perceive to be a threat to them or their food. All those videos of jags rubbing their paws on the glass near children, they weren't hungry. The kids just looked fun to kill. Story 12. One of my husband's family members works at the zoo in Calgary, and he told us a sad story about the time that the zoo flooded several years ago. Apparently, they have a strict kill-on-sight rule that basically says that any animal has to be shot if it leaves its enclosure. Luckily, it didn't come to that during the flood, as most animals had been secured before the water rose. But he told us that one of the hippos floated dangerously close to the edge of his enclosure, while his keeper sat in a boat, sobbing, aiming a shotgun at him. Imagine knowing you'll have to shoot your best buddy if he subconsciously floats too far. The other incident he mentioned was the time that some idiot kid chucked a rock at the glass of the panda exhibit, shattering it into a million pieces. A group of keepers put themselves between the pandas and the edge of the enclosure so they didn't have to shoot any for wandering out. Those pandas are on a loan from China and it probably would have caused an international incident. The pandas now have shatterproof glass. Why they didn't before is beyond me. Story 13. I used to volunteer weekly at a large zoo, and at one point management started doing monthly dangerous animal escape drills. Someone would run around in a lion onesie and we'd have to react as if one of the large animals had escaped. It was hilarious, but one of the funniest things I was taught was that if an incident did occur, you have to tell the nearby guests to get inside only once. If after that they refused to follow you indoors, the protocol was to hole up in the large activity center buildings, you were to leave them there and go inside yourself and lock the doors. It makes sense because people can be very stupid and you don't want to risk everyone's lives because of one Karen, but it amused me to no end that the protocol was just to let them get mauled. Absolutely. If someone is stupid enough to see a lion loose and is like, I don't want to go inside, I want to be with the lion, all you can do is be like, yeah, sure, man, just, yeah, go for it. Story 14. Former coworker got a job at the aquarium. He was basically the night watchman, making sure nothing exploded when the aquarium was closed. The thing is, he can't actually do anything about it. A ray jumped out of the open-touch pool, so he gently picked it up and set it back in the tank. No harm done, Ray is fine. He got chewed the F out for handling an animal. Policy is to call the expert handler for that department and have them come in to avoid any liability and whatnot. By the time you get them to pick up the phone at like 3 a.m., get up and drive into the city, it'll be like 40 minutes at best, assuming they came in at all. So his job really was to just stand there as the animal suffocated. He ended up quitting when he tried to call out sick because he had the flu. It was so bad he literally couldn't stand up straight, and part of the job was to walk the narrow, hanging walkway over the largest tank in the world, which included sharks, alone at night. And they told him to come in anyway. Story 15. My mom worked at a zoo when I was a kid, and there were some things that were kept under wraps. For one, a hyena escaped once and they had to track it down. Also, a pack of dogs got into the zoo and killed most of the wallabies. The worst story was that a group of teenagers broke in the 80s and pulled the legs off of the flamingos. That one always really bothered me. Yeah, bothers me too. Those are some psycho kids. That's like future serial killer behavior. Story 16. The amount of injuries you can just casually pick up from the animals is crazy. I've been kicked in the chest by a kangaroo, almost assaulted by an emu, attacked by a wombat and a bat, bitten by a monitor lizard and a carpet python, had a rhino charge at me, and been scratched by a macaque. My old boss had this badass scar from a snow leopard attack. And this guy I work with now has his entire left forearm mangled from an orangutan attack. It also shocks you how dumb people can be. There can be a huge sign that says, "Hello, I'm an echidna, not a porcupine," and people will still ask if it's a porcupine. You also get used to the same jokes every day. Like when you're cleaning up the outside enclosures in the view of the guests, some will eventually say, "Oh, what a strange animal, I wonder what kind it is," in regards to seeing a human. Or the amount of people who scream hump day when they see a camel. I have no qualms about picking up animal crap barehanded. I know what my animals have been eating. I know what's in their digestive systems, and to me, that makes it more bearable. I can have long discussions about poop consistency with my coworkers, and in fact, that's what a lot of general health talks are about. Yes, Homer's stool was a little looser than normal this morning. I wonder if something happened to him overnight to stress him out. You get used to being stinky as well. I currently work 8+ hours with primates daily, and I feel awful for the people who share a space with me when I go to the gym directly after work. Primate poop smells very similarly to human poop. When I was at the zoo, I smelled exclusively of rhino piss, and I couldn't get the smell off me. Story 17. I worked at a zoo in a northern country, I can't say which as it'll give it away, which had a white tiger and was quite famous for it. One day, the zoo announced the tiger had died of natural causes. Whilst working there a few years after he died, I was told by a keeper that there was actually a problem with the electric fencing, and zoo managers refused to pay to get it fixed, thinking that it would be fine. He was electrocuted to death a few weeks after they found the problem. They covered the whole thing up by saying they weren't sure how he died, but that he was old. It's still a zoo secret to this day. From all these stories, what I'm gathering is that zoo managers are really a lot like retail managers, and they try to skimp on whatever they can. This story sucks. A white tiger? Isn't that, like, really rare? What a huge waste that could have been absolutely prevented by spending a little bit of money. Gross negligence, I hate it. Story 18. I really respect my local zoo, John Ball Zoo in Grand Rapids, Michigan, for being honest about an accident that happened a few years ago. They had a very, very popular stingray and shark petting tank. I loved it and always paid extra to be able to hang out with them and pet them. Unfortunately, one night there was an electrical issue of some kind, and I believe they were electrocuted to death. Everyone was devastated, and they haven't been able to replace the stingrays or sharks and never will, even though they were popular. Zoo staff are honest with the guests about what happened even now, years later. I respect them for not lying or covering up the accident and instead using it as a conversation, in order to talk to folks about how important it is to properly care for animals and prevent accidents from happening. Story 19. I spoke to a zookeeper at the National Zoo in DC. We were watching another keeper inside the cheetah enclosure and I asked him about the danger involved. He said a cheetah is harmless to an adult human because it only hunts smaller creatures. I asked which creature was the worst to go in with, expecting hippo, elephant, or croc. Without hesitating, he said zebras. He leaned in close and whispered, "They're the biggest jerks. They will bite and kick you for no reason." I still think it's hilarious that of all the teeth and claws out there, it's the striped donkey horses that are the worst. Oh, I love cheetahs so much. This is something that probably like a lot of people know by now, but I have to say it because I love this fact so much. So cheetahs are like known as big cats to a lot of people, but they're not actually big cats. They're kind of like species, I guess. I don't know. I didn't take high school biology, but whatever they are is more similar to like house cats rather than big cats like lions or tigers. They can't roar and they can only purr. Oh, it's so cute. They're also super docile with humans, it's true. You can go on YouTube right now wait, you're watching this on YouTube. You can go to the search bar right now and look up like keepers sleeping with cheetahs. And it'll just be like a keeper in a cheetah enclosure or like a cheetah sort of sanctuary just hanging out. They'll like go to sleep next to them and cuddle up because it makes them feel more secure. Oh my god. Oh, I love cheetahs. Story 20. If you're a guest feeding/touching animals outside of the petting zoo or an encounter, you might just kill them. I could rant about this forever. The number of zoo animals that die from incorrect food in their systems is staggering. The average person has no idea which animals can be killed from an apple core, a piece of bread, or a grape. Even just picking leaves and grass from outside of the enclosure, a guest has no idea what an animal's digestive system cannot tolerate, and can easily place a death sentence on an animal just because they wanted a special interaction. Ooh, let's talk about diseases too. Our good pal rabies is a great one. Rabies vaccines are not produced specifically for every exotic animal species, so a vet will do the best they can by giving high-risk animals the closest version of an appropriate rabies shot. The closest version does not guarantee no rabies. You tried to touch a monkey that is undoubtedly covered in saliva from grooming? Better go get your rabies shot. Not to mention the abundance of parasites and human-foreign diseases that exotics can carry or we can pass on to them. Story 21. My wife was a zookeeper and I used to volunteer there a lot. 1. Most of zookeeping is just picking up poop and making/delivering food. 2. The animal that was the least scary was a cheetah. They were pretty cool, ignoring everything as long as they had food. The most scary to me were the giraffes. Back then, you went into the enclosure with them and they'd sometimes try to swing their heads around and hit you just to be jerks. You had to be careful. 3. The job would actually be fantastic if they didn't let people into the zoo. Story 22. The path to becoming a keeper is rough. It can literally start with working a concession stand at a zoo with a college degree making minimum wage, and the path to mobility being talking to the other keepers to the point they'll let you clean the cage of the animals they keep. Do that for a few years and hope that any position opens. Not necessarily the one you want, but just any one, because getting in the door is hard. High demand, low supply. It is a job where you need to really love the work and be okay with not making much. Story 23. I heard about this from a coworker at a small zoo I used to work at. If any animal escapes before the zoo opens to the public, the zoo is supposed to shut down completely for the day. Often though, for smaller zoos, they can't afford to lose a day open to the public. So if some specific types of animals escape, such as reptiles or small animals, they'll just keep it open while having keepers look for them. This sort of thing wouldn't fly by me on my days as a keeper. I never had anything escape other than a harmless tortoise. But I remember hearing from other coworkers that they just listened to our boss and opened, even though a small but somewhat venomous snake was on the loose. Story 24. Okay, as is tradition, not a full zookeeper, but when I was a teenager in the 90s, I did volunteer work at the Oakland Zoo. There weren't many of us, so we got to choose where we helped out. So I chose to work with Bhakti, the 32-ish-year-old Bengal tiger, nearly the oldest living Bengal tiger in captivity when he finally passed. I chose him because he was beautiful and he always seemed lonely. He had pacing syndrome hardcore, so his entire paddock was green and lush except for the paths along the outer fence line and one or two diagonals. The diagonals he used to get into and out of his night cage. The keepers did their best with him, but had clearly written him off. He was grumpy, unsocial, hid from the public, swiped and hissed at keepers, and ignored all of the enrichment toys and food put out to keep him mobile. They had a few young Siberians in quarantine already waiting to be put on display. They just had to wait for him to pass, and the stubborn old cat lived just to spite them. He always started the morning by pacing his fence line, so I started pacing with him. No eye contact, no sounds, just walking back and forth for an hour or two. After a couple of weeks, he started chuffing at me when I arrived, so I learned how to mimic it to say hi back. Another month, and he would actually break his pacing circuit to walk with me, jogging his ancient arthritic butt from wherever he was across the green sections to match me. Poor guy just needed a friend. I still get a bit misty-eyed thinking about him. Just a lonely old cat who had to spend the last years of his life basically alone. Don't get me wrong though, the keepers really did do their best, but they couldn't spend all day with him like I could. They had many duties and creatures to care for, and he had a really steep barrier to entry as a friend. As grumpy as he was, I still think he was good people. I think this one is a beautiful one to end it on. It's true, animals in captivity sometimes just look so lonely, and it often ends up being the case. Animals aren't used to that kind of solitude from their own species, so it's really weird for them a lot of the time. I'm really happy that OP gave his time to this tiger for his last few years on Earth. I know there's no way to tell, and maybe it's not even possible, but I feel like it meant a lot to the tiger. That's stupid, right? It's a little stupid, but come on, I can be a little sentimental.